You should have all gotten the fun little pre-recorded voice saying and recording is going now. Josh, the floor is yours, my friend. Take it away.
All right. I mean, I'm looking at all that vinyl in your background. I'm thinking maybe we should be recording this on vinyl. Would that be like,
That's the
is that the
dream,
thing? Is that
right?
the move?
Yeah, exactly.
Hey everybody. So my name is Josh Gurin. I am a applications IT recruiter. I've been doing it forever. I have been 23 years straight focused on recruiting and promoting qualified applications developers, lead developers, architects, coders, newbies, uh, you know, people that have been in the industry longer than I have, and people that are just getting started. So, I work with tech systems, and I tend to focus on backend Java and et cetera development, but branched into several other technologies lately. Very interested in where things are headed with the cloud and containerization and all that jazz. So I am here in Sacramento, and though I focus locally, the changes with COVID have had a radical impact on the way the industry is actually doing what it does in terms of hiring. So some of you have heard me give this presentation before. The end of this presentation, or the second half of it, will definitely be altered to reflect what is now happening in COVID, because it is a different story. I think that has really impacted the industry in a way that's here to stay. The notion of the remote's not feasible has clearly been dispelled, and yet that doesn't necessarily mean everyone's doing remote from now on, and that push and pull, that tug of war is continuing. So we'll talk about that later. The general point I usually make in this presentation is in terms of resumes. As far as why you should care about what it is I'm trying to say here. It kind of focuses on what most people don't know happens behind the scenes when they actually submit their resume somewhere. I've had lots of people ask me, I was ideal for that job. I submitted my resume. I didn't get a call back. I didn't even get an acknowledgement. Like, it's just nothing. It went into the void. And there's a lot of potential reasons why that happens. So I do not recommend spamming your resume to death, and I absolutely never advocate falsifying your resume. There is a lot of that out there. It gets found out quick. It's a bad idea. Don't do it. But there is definitely some tricks that you can use to make sure you're getting credit for not just the work you've done, but the knowledge you've gained, both and, as opposed to either or. So I have a sample resume that I can put up on the screen. We will get to that, but in a nutshell, there's 4 stages of review or scrutiny that happen once you submit your resume. Boolean search, stack rank, at a glance, and scrutinous review. Okay, so what do those mean? So the Boolean search is quite literally what it sounds. Your resume either does or does not have the required search terms, yes, no, file to be proceeded with, or they kick it out. All 4 stages except the very last one are a fairly pessimistic filter. And it's just because that's easier to do. It's easier to disqualify than to verify qualification. So that they save that part for last. So really your objective is to survive the first 3 stages and get to the 4th stage without getting auto kicked out of the process completely. If you can do that, you're probably winning. If your resume simply does not have what the job requires, oftentimes it'll just kick you out. I'm not talking about years of experience. I'm talking about actual keywords. So the stack rank is then next. These are the resumes that had the necessary keywords in them, so they went into the okay, fine, stage 1 pile. Stage 2, stack rank. AI is getting better at this, so this isn't as much of an issue as it used to be. But the notion that you have 20 years of experience and you mention the subject twice in your entire resume, versus the guy that has 2 years of experience and mentions the subject 20 times in his resume, who do you think that AI is going to stack rank first? Right? They are not all sophisticated. This is, artificial intelligence. Ooh, it's a broad term. So I would not rely on that. Why not be bulletproof? Why not ensure that you are driving home whatever point you were trying to make? When you read a job description, try to pick out the top 3 to 5 things in terms of buzzwords, if you will, skill sets that they are looking for as qualifications for that position. Avoid years of experience and just make sure the actual skill sets themselves are listed, including permutations of them, right? If you need to be PMP certified, maybe write down that you're a certified project management professional, and then somewhere else also mention PMP, right? Because you don't know what permutation they're using. If it's Java, mention Java and J2EE or JEE, right? If it's .NET, might mention C#, not just .NET, and vice versa. So give yourself a broad scatter spray of mentioning it, but there's they call it the Control F test, right? In Microsoft, Control F, Control Find. If you search those terms in your resume and then you hit all the way down your resume, most HR reps, they're not expressly technical. Some of them aren't technical at all, right? So they have very little limited idea what they're looking at. They don't know that JavaScript has nothing to do with Java, for example, right? So that's kind of important. And a lot of them, no, that's not really just on the radar. So they're given a set of terms. They're asked to verify those terms in their resume. They Control F, and they step through the resume. As they hit, they look up to the right, grab the dates, write the dates down next to years of experience, go to the bottom and tally. That is how they've read the resume. Okay, they're looking for years, 7 years of experience in XYZ skill set. Well, if you have XYZ skill set at the top in your overview and you do not redundantly restate it in the job where it occurred, you have 0 years experience in that skill set. Why? Because the HR rep sees it at the top, bam. Okay, no years here, goes down to the bottom, didn't see any years of experience, out, disqualified. So that's one of the first mistakes people often make, is they don't redundantly restate the important skills they have, especially the top skills in the position, in the job where it actually occurred. Give yourself a chronological redundancy. You should have a one-to-many, if not at least one-to-one ratio of everything on top in your overview as per the actual job descriptions themselves. I'll show you a very easy way to do that in a moment. But just so you know, that's a lot of people don't understand why they weren't selected. If they say, I have 13 years experience in Java, and then they don't say Java in their actual chronology, 13 years where, when, what? I don't know. You didn't say, gone, right? They don't have time or inclination to muddle with it. They're disqualifying first before they see who they want to interview. So if they can take and shave it down from 500 applicants to 100 applicants to 40 applicants, they're going to do that. They're going to do that quickly in any means they can. Once they, the Control F test is satisfied, essentially, and that can be automated or manual by humans. Before I move on, I recommend Control Fing your own resume, right? If you know they're looking for these 3 to 5 things, search that term or that particular skill in your resume. How many times did it hit, right? It should hit at least 3 to 5 times each if you're strongly qualified. So if it doesn't, make it so it does. That way you're guaranteed to at least get past that second stage. Stage 3 is the at a glance, or what I often call the strafing run. It's where you're finally to a human, right? This is an actual human being, but that human being is spending maybe 1 to 3 seconds per page and maybe less. That is not enough time to read your resume. If they have to read your resume to figure out you're qualified, you're not qualified. So they literally just like rip through the resume in kind of a diagonal fashion from upper left to bottom right. And if the words that they're looking for that skill set more or less jump off the page at them, kind of reach out and pop them on the chin, they'll put it in the probably yes pile. And if it doesn't, there's a very good chance they'll put it in the eliminated pile. Okay. So the fourth and final stage is a scrutinous review. Sometimes this is when you're actually picked for an interview before this happens. If they're looking through the resume in a hurry and they see most of what they're looking for and it's basically right, okay, fine. You'll go in the probably yes pile. That probably yes pile is small enough, you might even get the interview right then and there. Scrutinous review sometimes happens right before you walk in the room for the interview itself. They're reading your resume, 3 to 5 minutes before you walk in the door. More often than not, it happens prior to being selected for the interview, but you can be selected before they even read your resume once. So again, how important is it not to rely on them reading your resume to realize you're qualified? It could literally make the difference. More often than not, they'll read it before they select you for interview. They're investing a lot of time in that interview, so they're probably going to make sure it's worth it. As they read your resume, what are they looking for, right? They're looking for reasons why they should pick you over somebody else that looks just like you on paper. Okay, so that's where the resume format I recommend comes into play. It's almost built upside down with stage 4 first, marketable bullets that reach off the page and pop you on the chin, and then a skills used subsection at the bottom of each chronological entry as a laundry list and a catch-all to make absolutely sure they have to associate those dates with that experience. So let me share my screen real quick and show you guys what I'm talking about. Share screen. There we go. So this is if you guys can see that, you're good. Thumbs up. All right. This is the format that I'm suggesting. You have your name at the top, your phone number and email contact. Maybe now location has something to do with it, and I'll get back to that later. You don't want to put your address because you don't want to be like harvested or web crawl. Just put your city. Objective, short to the point. It is highly advisable to put the exact job title of the position you're applying for in your objective, right? It's an extra keyword hit. It does you no harm. I'm looking for a job doing this, this, or this. Mix it in with 2 other things, but at least put the exact title of what you're looking for that job in your resume. Your resume is typically contoured each time you apply to a job anyway. I'd recommend your LinkedIn be a very, very close skeletal framework to whatever resume you contour for each job submittal. But this is a free way to get an extra pip on your submittal. I also mention if you're okay on site, if you're only looking for remote. That's something that can matter early as well. So skill set summary. This is where people usually put everything they've done and think it counts. And it counts-ish, right? It counts in the sense that it's going to get noticed. It's good reference. It's not something I'd remove, but you don't get actual credit for it until you redundantly restate it in the actual chronological job where it happened. That's the main point. That's the biggest pitfall most people fall into. All right, so how do you put it in the job where it happened, right? So this is the actual format I recommend for each position, okay? This right here is probably going to save you. I don't care if you don't use this exact format. And Nolan, I can send this to you so people can have it if they want like a verbatim copy, but the format itself isn't as important as the points that it covers. Okay, so what points does it cover? You have client name, title, and dates. Always, always, always put dates. Always, always, always put dates, right? You have a paragraph, you have bullets, and then you have skills used. This is what matters first. This is stage 1 and 2. Okay, this is the catch-all. This is the laundry list. This is everything you did at that client that's relevant. Mention things like mentorship. Mention things like agile, right? Mention industries. In addition to things like .NET and Java and React and Node and ES6 and et cetera, right? So you're going to put everything here that you want to be acknowledged for this time frame. That when they either AI or humans, control F tests your resume, they are forced to associate that skill set with those years. Boom, you have that many years experience in that thing. So that laundry list makes you bulletproof in that regard. Okay. Second part is the third stage, the at a glance or the strafing run. That's where these bullet points come in handy. Okay, these bullet points are the rip through the resume at 1 to 3 seconds per page and came away with something sort of a thin slice or like a snapshot in my mind of what reached out and grabbed me from the resume. These bullets are what does that. So I would recommend, anywhere from 3 to 8 words per bullet. Make sure they're the marketable aspects of what you've done. This is not everything. The skills used laundry list is everything. This is the stuff relevant to that job or that profession. It doesn't have to be verbatim skills. It can be things like the magnitude of projects you've managed, or if you're working on a e-commerce team that's especially complex, that can be something that's put in here, even though Java is the job you're applying for. E-commerce gets you street cred, right? So DevOps, CI/CD, things you implemented yourself or championed yourself, causes that you brought to the floor and made sure happened. I had one guy put in here that he got his company to begin using GitHub as their code repository. So, that stuff like that. This is the differentiator, like the stage 1, level 1, just starting to differentiate. This is why I'm sure you're qualified, at least at a quick glance, and you go in the probably yes pile. Okay. Stage 4, the Scrutinous review. This is what I'm talking about, it being built upside down. The paragraph's the first thing in the job description, and yet it's the last thing seen or at least read. They don't have time to read your resume until you're more or less probably selected for the interview. So what does this paragraph do? This paragraph is the tiebreaker. right? This paragraph is, why should I pick you over somebody else that almost looks just like you on paper? If you can put that in this paragraph, you're getting that interview most times. So the very last person to see this part of the resume, odds are that's the person either interviewing you or deciding who gets interviewed. So it's a great springboard for discussion in a resume, in an interview, and it's your differentiator, or your why me section, as opposed to just I'm qualified. Right? There's a difference between I'm qualified and why should I pick me. You have lots of qualified people applying. Why am I special? So anything important or distinctive, that's what goes in the paragraph. But again, don't rely on the paragraph to get the interview, because that's risky. You may already have the interview before they read the paragraph. So you keep repeating this particular format for each chronological job entry all the way to the bottom. And then I stick the education section after the work experience section, not before. Generally speaking, it's because it gives you an opportunity to talk about stuff you learned without masquerading it as experience. But more importantly, here's where you get credit for what you know, not just what you've done. Okay? Additional self-study and personal projects. It goes underneath the education section, so it's impossible to accidentally think you're lying and claiming this is actual hands-on experience for paid money, right? This is a separate category. You're completely safe. You have carte blanche. You can talk about anything, right? You can talk about stuff you've read about that you're curious and interested in. You can talk about stuff you want to learn. You can talk about stuff you did a hello world in. Anything that you want to get in your resume as a keyword searchable item can go here, and you're totally safe. Just make sure it's something you can, at least hang with in a discussion in an interview, because if you write it down, they might bring it up, right? So the one thing I always tell people is, if you're going to do a self-study personal project section, use dates, right? Studied Node for what, a minute, an hour, a year, a decade? Like, wow, put some meat on that bone, right? Studied Node. What did you study? What did you learn? What do you like? Give me some dates. How long did you study? What are the courses? Give me some reference. You can, you have the ability to put meat on this bone. So additional self-study and personal projects. This is where you get credit for what you know, and not just simply what you've done. Just, do yourself that favor. Include detail, include dates. The reason I title this presentation, "The One-Page Resume is a Myth," even though this is on one page, I just did that for brevity. A one-page resume is really an executive summary. It's something you hand someone when you walk into an interview setting and they haven't read your resume yet. And they're like, "Do you have a copy of your resume?" "No, they didn't prepare me very well." "Oh, here, boom." And they can just real quick get that done while you're standing in front of them for the interview. That's an executive summary. That's a one-page resume. Okay? Resumes really, they used to do one-page resumes because they kept everything in a file cabinet, physical file cabinet, and it was huge, and they didn't want to run out of space, so they limited it to a page. That was etiquette. That's not a thing anymore. It's all one scrolling page now, right? 2 to 4 pages is the norm. I have had managers point blank tell me, if they can fit it on one page, there is no way they can be qualified to do what I need done. So, there's that, right? So don't be afraid of cresting past one page. You don't want to write a novella. I mean, again, they're not necessarily going to read it until you've already sort of been picked. So don't rely on them reading it to get credit. And, don't overtax the eye. But 2 to 4 pages, absolutely the norm. If you've got 4 years experience, you should have about a page and a quarter, page and a half of resume. You got 10, 12, 15 years experience, probably 3 pages, maybe 2.5 pages, maybe 1.5 page, but something in the 2 to 4 page range is normal. And that way, again, you're getting full credit for the work you've done in terms of that skills used section at the bottom of each job. I will say that the further back you go in your history, the less detailed those job descriptions need to become. So your last 5 years experience should be very detailed. Prior 5, not so much. Anything past 10 years, I mean, that should be bare bones. You should have skills used. You should sort of have a bullet or two about what you did in a really short paragraph. You don't need to take a lot of real estate with that. So generally speaking, don't feel like you have to have the same level of detail all the way back. But again, they want 12 years experience in Java. It would be a good idea to have Java listed under 12 chronological years of experience. So you're really writing the resume for them as opposed to for you. You know what I mean? It's even if them is a computer algorithm, like even if them is AI, you're pandering to your audience. You want the same physical document to survive all 4 stages of scrutiny and do it well. As long as you do that, I don't care what format you use. You don't have to use mine. Any format you use that accomplishes all 4 of those stages effectively and forces them to give you credit for what you've done and gives you an opportunity to talk about what you know and haven't done yet but are interested in a way that still has a last minute differentiator as soon as they try to decide which of these 2 to interview, you're golden. Any format that does that takes care of it. So that's my recommendation as far as the resume format itself, that sidesteps a lot of those pitfalls that a lot of people accidentally run into and then are left confused and wondering why they never got a call back, and yet the guy with 2 years experience is interviewing on Tuesday, right? So that's one. In terms of the other things to be aware of in a resume, I generally go by the adage, if you didn't write it down, you didn't do it, like period. So I have a lot of people tell me that, I did this and I did that and I did this, and I'm like, okay, great, write it down. You know what I mean? Did you ever mentor anybody? Sure, I mentored like 3 people. Write it down. You know what I mean? If you didn't write it down, you didn't do it. Like, why would they know that? They don't know you. You're not substantiated to them yet. So another really big pitfall that people fall into all the time is the phrase, they should know that ... Why should they know that, right? Well, they should know that if you did DevOps, you obviously have CI/CD. Really? Why would HR have any idea CI/CD has squat to do with DevOps, right? They were given a search term that said CI/CD. They didn't get DevOps as a search term. So, be mindful of the fact that you're pandering to your audience. You don't necessarily know who's on the other end of that, as that recipient. So, that's another thing that a lot of people, I also run into the phrase, they need to know that this and that, and they need to know that a developer can work remotely because otherwise, and I'm like, they need to know, like they're going to go out of business if they don't know, or would they do well to know? Like, of course they'd be better off acknowledging it, but they don't need to do anything. They don't need to do a darn thing, right? So a lot of times people will be very insistent that the world is a certain way, and they do so at their own peril. Like, they don't, you know what I mean? Like, it's you're drawing conclusion and inference from your own experience. It's not necessarily the same on the other side of the fence. So just be careful of that. We covered the syntax and permutations. Things that are common phraseologies like .NET, like email suffixes end with .NET, right? So maybe you should put, in addition to the dot, period, and the NET, maybe you should have DOT NET, and maybe you should have DOT space NET, right? Because you don't know what they're searching with. Let's see. As far as quantify. If you can quantify things that you've done, it will often give you more credibility. So the size of the budget, the size of the team, realized differences that you actually brought into effect, tangible results achieved, but also pitfalls avoided. That's one thing a lot of people leave off their resume. They talk about what they did, but oftentimes they don't give themselves credit for what they prevented from happening. You don't want to make it sound like the place would have gone down in flames without you, but if you saw something coming that's a common problem in a common industry, and you're like, I saw that coming and made sure the team got out of its way, that might be something a manager's like, ooh, oh yeah, no, I need that, right? Like, that might be good. So don't be afraid to consider one of your tangible results as problems you avoided and not just results you achieved. Brevity is the soul of wit. I say that after I say don't worry about length. Get it on there until you're done, like 2 to 4 pages. I would focus on what's relevant about what you've done as per the job you're applying for. You want a magnifying glass versus, absolutely everything. Just target your target audience. Just because you did it doesn't mean it absolutely has to be on there. That said, anything you want credit for doing does have to be on there. So just be aware. If you start talking about every single little thing you ever did while you were there, it's natural to assume some people are going to go, a little snowblind on it. But anything relevant, make sure you write it down or it doesn't count. So that's the resume itself. I have a couple other things to bring up, but I hate talking at people. So as a presenter, it makes me a little uncomfortable. Does anyone have any questions specifically to anything we talked about? Anything that landed but you weren't quite sure? Like, lay it on.
Josh, I've got a question for you.
Yes.
A moment ago you mentioned spelling out .net .net and then spell it .dotnet and also do the dot space net for filtering purposes to hit all the different purposes, hit all the different search criteria. As a hiring manager, when I see a resume though with JavaScript spelled one word and then 4 paragraphs later JavaScript spelled 2 words and then somewhere else it's spelled with a capital J and somewhere else with a lowercase j, that generally hits my eye as this person doesn't have an attention to detail and they're being inconsistent within their resume. And that strikes me as a reason to throw a resume out, not a thing that they did to gain the search criteria on the HR side. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
It's always a dangerous gambit, right? So an interview situation is a highly extrapolative environment. And you just illustrated that perfectly. So the tiniest little thing can make someone conclude that it's one way versus another. I was using that as an example. So I don't think it's critical that you do that. Most people will know .NET is .NET, especially if you have C# accompanying it, right? But I consider JavaScript to be one word, right? Is microservices one word or is microservices 2 words, right? I've heard microservices and microservices. So those are examples of times when I don't think it would be necessarily a given that you're going to get someone bent over your perceived lack of attention to detail. Something I often throw out there is I'd rather be 5% more annoying than 95% invisible, right? If you never make it to the table in the first place, it's a moot point. Sorry, you're out. I'd almost rather take a risk of getting rejected 5% of the time than never being seen in the first place. So don't go full spam, right? You never go full spam, right? But if you're 5% spammier than you were, and it gets you 95% more visibility as opposed to being auto-rejected, I feel like that's a decent gamble. I don't think all in all, on the whole, that's going to hurt you more often than it helps you. I do acknowledge what you're saying. Everybody try as a resume reviewer, a lot. You start getting me different fonts in a resume. Oh, this resume is doctored out, right? Gone. You start getting me, they use the word and then a space and then the comma. Oh my God, you're gone. There's no way. So even I look for telltale signs of the preponderance of evidence saying a resume is likely not correct or inaccurate or been unfairly doctored. So I'm not recommending going down that path. But what I am recommending is, give yourself the opportunity to catch PMP or project management professional. Give yourself the opportunity to spell out some of those acronyms. You want to be as bulletproof as possible without going so far that you start to do yourself damage. I'm willing to take a little bit, single-digit percentage of damage to gain massive visibility.
So would you say it's fair? I mean, typically for abbreviations, people say, use the abbreviation throughout the doc, but the first time you use the abbreviation, explain it. So
sounds fine.
Yeah,
it sounds fine.
Yeah.
And all of these are suggestions. Sometimes they matter a lot. Sometimes they don't matter at all, right? It's not like you have to or you're smoked. It's just that you're catering to the audience. If you know for a flat fact you're going to a highly technical company with highly technical resume reviewers, you need less of this. If you're going to, Amazon, there's a great deal of technicality there. If you're applying to, Macy's, maybe there's less. You know what I mean? I'm pulling those companies out of a hat. I hope that doesn't bother anyone, but it's the nature of the industry and the nature of the company, and the size of the HR department. How many of those HR department exclusively focus on technical hires versus generic hires? One of the things that working with a staffing agency does for you, and just saying, is we will often work directly with the hiring decision makers and not HR. And so we don't get caught in that pile of obscurity that comes from people reviewing the resumes that aren't necessarily, classically adept at what they're looking at. So we go right to people that know the difference, and that tends to make a fairly big impact on what we're doing. And in that case, you're at a lot less risk because you need a lot less of that in the resume. So again, your resume is a living document. You're probably going to contour and modify it for each individual job you apply to. Generally speaking, you can do it with the same doc across the board, and that's kind of the point of your LinkedIn. But if I'm applying to a specific position, I'm taking 5 or 10 minutes and seeing if I can max out my chances of getting seen for that particular position based on the resume I'm using. So again, just suggestions, not hard and fast rules. But I have, to Nolan's point, you don't want to get too crazy with it, or else you can eventually everything has a tipping point, right? There is such a thing as too much of a good thing. So
yes, my concern would be if I tailored a resume for the more like a recruiter who's not tech specific, a recruiter just like deals with hundreds of resumes a day from a variety of things. So I put the JavaScript, the Java space script, the uppercase, lowercase, whatever. So it hits all of that person's criteria. They go, oh, cool, Nolan is qualified for the job. And then they hand that resume though to the hiring manager.
I think the Java space script's an error.
I agree. Okay, I'll use a different example. The .NET versus the .SpaceNet, or one of those.
Sure.
If I do it with the 3 variations, so the not super technical recruiter, it fits all of their criteria, and they go, great. And then they hand that resume to a hiring manager who is technical. I got past the first gate, but the second gate's going to look at it. Are they going to know the resume came in because Nolan did the SEO optimization basically to get it through the tech recruiters? Or are they going to look at it and go, oh, this guy's wildly inconsistent in his resume? Is it going to get deleted at the second gate?
My feeling there, I'm a hiring manager with about 25 years experience. Most hiring managers who are looking at those resumes that have come through their HR department have a sense of how their HR department functions. So if they already know that their HR department are going to favor .NET spelled out, then they're going to be okay with it. Or if they're a company that's hiring lots of .NET developers, they're going to go and make sure that their HR people actually know it's spelled .NET, and that's what you're going to look for in a resume. So, I agree that there are a lot of companies that are going to hit a weird middle ground where they don't have technical recruiters, and perhaps the hiring managers aren't, really clued into how their recruiters work. But there's also a lot of companies where, that is going to work one way or the other, because either the recruiters, the HR people are clued in because they have to be, especially at some of the bigger companies where you have a dedicated recruitment team for like the development area. So yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about that. I think it's a good idea to, to game the SEO aspect of it to some extent, but I wouldn't worry too much about it getting rejected by engineering managers because of that.
And the cross-referencing of multiple permutations, you can do a lot of that in the skills overview and then be dead to rights uniform all the way through your chronological resume description. So, you put SEO at the beginning as a bullet on a skills overview search, and then you friend, search engine optimization, because what if they're saying search engine experience instead of SEO? And then all the way through the rest of your resume, it's all SEO. So there's ways to play that where you don't put yourself as much exposure or risk. It's a valid point. I mean, that's you're in a highly extrapolative environment. So to that note, there's other things they're going to be extrapolating, right? So for example, your email address. This should be a no-brainer. Keep it professional. It's don't do anything too flamboyant. Don't do anything rude or profane. Don't do anything political. Your email address should be simple, straightforward, and professional. It's, if your email address is Epstein totally killed himself at gmail.com, that's not going to win you, that's going to do you damage once in a while.
Yeah.
So, it's, Joe Murderer at Yahoo. Maybe that's not, maybe it's the wrong email address. Perhaps you should get one that's more professional. Another thing is compromising photos or blog posts or online rants. How many people here have actually Googled themselves, right? It's worth doing. They don't do it all the time, but they do it once in a while, especially if that's a public-facing role or a role where you're going to be having a lot of interaction with people that matter and not just, kind of doing your thing in a corner. So if you've got a bunch of public images of yourself hanging half dressed from a chandelier with a drink in your hand, maybe that's something you should clean up before you go out applying for the public relations job for a conservative newspaper. I'm just saying, right? So be aware of your online presence, starting with the email address you use on your resume. As far as online presence, I cannot stress enough how vital LinkedIn has become. Most recruiting agencies and most large companies, for that matter, will have a resume database. They'll have something on file for you, either the one you applied with or the one you had before. It's not always as updated, especially if you're an agency and you're using a resume that you got a year ago. LinkedIn's always updated. Recruiters know the resumes on LinkedIn's are always updated because they're crowdsourced is the wrong word. They're personally maintained. Everyone updates their LinkedIn. They get promoted, they update their LinkedIn. They get a new job, they update their LinkedIn, right? So LinkedIn should be sort of your master document, and then the jobs you're applying for are a modified version of the skeletal scaffolding that you have on LinkedIn. But LinkedIn is huge. People are like, oh, I don't have a LinkedIn profile. I'm like, how are you applying for a job without a LinkedIn profile? Okay, here's another clue on what happens behind the scenes. Reference checks are a big deal. Background checks are a big deal. But unless they're actually required, you know how they do those now? They go to LinkedIn, right? That's the de facto HR reference check, background check shortcut. They go to your LinkedIn and see if it matches. Okay, I do it all the time, every time. Do the job companies and clients and dates and experience on your LinkedIn match your resume? No. Well, we have a problem. Okay. It says here you worked at these 3 companies, but over here, not so much. That's a quickie little, background check you can do as the resume comes in. Another thing about LinkedIn is it simply validates you are who you say you are, right? That has a lot to do with references. Round about 2000, I think it was 9, certainly during the recession at some point, a lot of companies stopped giving references because they didn't want to interfere with someone's right to work. California is an at-will right-to-work state. So you're working at the will of the employer, but you always have a right to work. They can't prevent you from getting another job. They give you a negative reference check. It's kind of a legal gray area, whether that's preventing you from getting another job. Therefore, they're acting like they still have some sort of tie to you and are interfering with your right to work, and everybody gets sued. Class action, it's a bad idea. So some companies just say like, oh, we don't give reference checks. And people have actually told me, well, reference checks aren't a thing anymore, so I don't need them anymore. See how far that gets you, buddy, right? So if you've done well at your company, at your job, most people will give you a reference, even if it's not an official reference. All right, we're not talking about written letters of recommendation on company letterhead. We're talking about somebody who's willing to take a call on the side and say, yeah, that person was good. They did good work. You know what I mean? I would work with them if I started a company. I'd work with them. I can't give you any official reference because my company doesn't do references. LinkedIn has a thing for that. It's called recommendations. Okay, it's not endorsements. That one-click thing where you endorse people and skill sets. That's garbage. I have people endorsing me and stuff I don't do that I don't know. So endorsements are garbage. Couldn't care less. Recommendations are different though. Recommendations are someone on LinkedIn saying, this person's legit and these are the reasons, right? In this skill or this category. Everyone should link in with as many people as they know professionally as they can. And my recommendation to them is reach out to people you know that you felt good about, that you had respect for, that were, professionals in their own right, and say, hey, I'd be happy to provide you a recommendation. If you'd be willing to do the same for me, that'd be great. I'd appreciate it. Okay, 10,000 ants can't be wrong. If you're the average HR rep that knows very little about very little, and you go to their HR or their LinkedIn profile and you see 10 recommendations for this skill set, and you're like, click one at random. That person's profile looks legitimate. They look like they're the real deal. Click on another one. That person looks legitimate. This guy goes in the probably yes pile. Or this girl gets the, most likely to be selected for interview pile. Or this person gets the, I believe this resume is accurate pile, right? It's a de facto tool they utilize just verbatim. And so people that are doing this without LinkedIn or doing this with a LinkedIn that their resume doesn't, match well enough, or more commonly, doing it without recommendations on LinkedIn. They're so easy to get. Anyone you've ever worked with professionally, you had respect for, reach out to LinkedIn with them first. Once you link in, now that email chat back and forth is free, right? You don't have to pay for it. I'd be, thought you did really well when we worked together. I'd be happy to provide you a recommendation if you want one. If you're willing to, I'd love a recommendation from you. I'm currently looking for a position. This would help me a great deal. Okay, it's not a reference check. Doesn't pack the same punch as an actual official reference check where you provide 2 references when you're applying for a job. It's awfully close. If you have 10 recommendations, my personal guess, you can come up with 2 references. And so that preponderance, that odds of evidence leads me to put you in the probably yes pile. And that's exactly where you want to be, right? Everything else you can work out by individually by detail afterwards. So LinkedIn will save you. LinkedIn will absolutely save you. I will also venture that a good majority of recruiters, they just use LinkedIn to recruit. In-mails are free if you're LinkedIn connected and et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of people just use LinkedIn as their, banner they wave, and then all of a sudden all these job offers pour in, like, oh, wow, I guess, click, right? So a neat little trick. This is just, I'll tell you, all right? How about that? I'll tell you. The trick is change your cover photo. Change your main cover photo on LinkedIn. If you're working at a company, you don't want to let them know you're looking, right? Because you're worried about your boss or whatever. But you want to change your status on LinkedIn. You want to update your LinkedIn profile. If you update your LinkedIn profile with a new job title and all this stuff because you got promoted, totally legit. You're going to get 100 job offers or at least inquiries because it blasts it out to everybody in your network saying, so-and-so updated their profile. It tips recruiters off like this guy might, who knows? They updated their profile. Maybe they uploaded a new resume. Let's see if they want a job, right? If you do that and your company is really on their game and they see your LinkedIn profile, like, why are you updating your profile? Are you looking? What's going on, right? A way around that, you just update your cover photo. Oh, my cover photo was super outdated. Didn't even look like me. I hated it. I just updated a better cover photo. I just, social media, you just got to be mindful of this stuff, right? Totally viable, totally plausible. And yet, boom, it blasts out your entire network. So-and-so updated their profile. Great way to say, hey, I might be looking in a plausibly deniable way so that you don't get in trouble with your boss. So little tip from your Uncle Josh. Let's see what else. Job sites. Job sites are kind of the last place people look, but they do sort of work sometimes. So if you're really hurting for a position or you really want to mass cast yourself out there, they're not unviable, right? But they're the last place people look. So I'm absolutely going to go to LinkedIn first to see if I can find somebody qualified before I start trolling Indeed. And Indeed's one of the better sites, right? So there's a lot of sites out there that are questionable in terms of their quality. Right now, we are on a 1.5% IT unemployment rate. And at least 1% of that is deliberately unemployed, frictional unemployment. So you're talking about a fraction of a percentage of people that are actually unemployed who wish to be employed. So if there are, something like, 18, 20% more jobs available than there are IT qualified individuals to fill them, there's that level of screaming, pounding on the pavement demand, and you're unemployed, you might be the exception. You could be the diamond in the rough, but there also might be a reason. Maybe you're challenging to work with, right? So it's not that there's a stigma of being unemployed, because to be honest, the employment market is so hot right now that you could be unemployed and people are like, look, let's just find out what's really going on here. Who knows? Maybe this is my lucky day, and this unemployed person just happens to wander in and they're qualified. Which we're totally willing to look into that further. That could, you know what I mean? Lucky day scenario, yeah, let's do this. But again, you're unemployed and you can't provide any references at all. You have no recommendations on LinkedIn, and your LinkedIn doesn't match verbatim with your resume. It's kind of off, and you're just, you're telling people why they have to understand that people don't do references anymore. They have to understand that on-site's not a thing anymore. Just it starts stacking up. So the notion that LinkedIn is not important, or the notion that because you applied to a job site, they should take your application seriously. Job sites help, but LinkedIn will save you. Using your network and letting people know you're available in a direct way, even using agencies, in my opinion, is vastly superior to just using job sites. Because again, they're not going to HR. You're not applying to the HR rep that posted the position on the job site. You're applying directly to the hiring decision maker, because that's generally speaking what the agencies will do for you. So that's, in a nutshell, that's just some of the advice I have as far as the act of online job hunting. Again, it's not that you can't use the job sites, but there are more efficient and much more direct ways to get your resume in front of people that know what they're looking at. So again, any questions so far? I mean, I got a little bit more, but that's basically, those are the first 2/3. You guys good? All right, so let's talk about COVID. Let's talk about what happened in COVID and the conversation that is taking place in the industry now that COVID, I mean, we're tailing out of it, but it's still doing the Delta dance, and you know what I mean? Like, it's not over. COVID answered the question, is remote possible? Every die-hard, resistant, obstinate manager this side of Sunday who said remote's never a thing, and if I can't see you at your desk, I don't know that you're working, and like every resistant individual this side of Sunday had to acknowledge remote's viable. It's viable. Sorry, it is, right? Work got done, and in many cases, work improved. Not all of them. To say that everybody had a better experience and every project was better once you went remote, that's not true. But a good majority of them. You had a lot of people that were happier and working more productively because they were remote, right? Now, here's the catch. The conversation that's presently being had in the industry is one of philosophy, not viability, okay? As a manager, as a company, as an organization, are you better off having happier employees who work remotely and are just trusted to be the professionals they are and do their thing their way on their schedule, or an organized schedule, whatever it is, but are remote's the name of the game, right? Remote makes you happier. Is happy employees better? Or are employees that have a tighter relationship with one another more cohesive, more camaraderie? Are employees that care about each other as a team more better? Okay. What do I mean by that? If you are face to face with someone as opposed to Zoom, you're just that much more invested. You physically sat across the table with them. There's something about that in-person, physical presence, human connection that tends to bond people. It's not that you can't bond over Slack. It's not that it's impossible to have a bond working remotely. You can have a real tight team, right? But by and large, on average, generally speaking, if you spend some time face to face, you're probably going to be a tighter team unit. Overall, so which is better? Which is the better management team, company, organizational philosophy? Is it make them happier or make them work tighter as a group? Right? That discussion is happening as we speak. What we are seeing nationwide is about 65 to 70% of companies in the United States are implementing some kind of return to office policy. They're even doing it in the middle of Delta, right? Delta slowed them down a little. They put a couple extra months on the tail end, but they're doing it. They're going to go back to work eventually. What does that look like? A vast majority of them are going back to work on some sort of hybrid schedule. I've seen people do 1 week on, 1 week off, the old wax on, wax off approach, right? I've seen a whole lot of companies do 3 days on, 2 days off. That seems to be the preferred managerial mode because it's basically on site, but not. Okay. I've seen some companies, a select few, do 2 days on and 3 days off. And oh, am I keeping my eye on what happens there? I think that might easily become the dominant model for really senior people that know what they're doing and can prove they know what they're doing, but they're still part of an organization that puts some value in that face-to-face cohesive team unity, right? Especially in the Bay Area. Commute's a problem? Well, let's just commute once, right? Where do you live? I live in Sacramento. Where's your job? Yeah, it's in San Francisco. But I do one evening a week at an Airbnb where I struck a deal with the person where every, Wednesday night I spend the night there, and that's just reserved for me, and it's cheaper. It's not cheap, but it's cheaper, right? And as a result, I get a Bay Area salary, and I'm on site, and I'm working in this incredible environment, but yet my family's still in Sacramento, and I'm home 3 days a week. I only have to spend one night away from my family. Pretty viable. That's pretty viable. There are companies that are just remote forever. Again, ballpark 30+% of America is now remote forever. Like that's what they're doing. They sold their building. They don't have a physical location anymore, right? It's remote now for realsies. A lot of companies are doing great with that. I know several organizations, local and otherwise, that were always remote. And now they're like, this is the best ever. Like everybody wants to be remote now. So they have this feeding frenzy of hiring where they're just gobbling up people that are like, return to office, psst, I'm out. Can't, no, not me, not this kid. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of people that are just, they call it the, what was it? Not mass resignation. They had this really clever term for it. I know I'm going to forget it. The great quit or something. There's been articles about it where the number of people resigning this year, radically exceed 20% higher than ever before, blah, blah, blah. So I've seen it firsthand. I call it poaching because that's what it is. People are being poached left and right. Your senior talent, they are the most in danger because they're the ones that will, if they are not absolutely thrilled with their job, there's a remote job out there that'll let them work from home 100% of the time, give them anything they want, pay them anything they want. And it's not even that hard to find. Sometimes it comes to them, right? So if you're not pleased with what you're doing, you are no longer geographically constrained. The majority of the jobs still have some sort of hybrid component of on-site, but there's a good third of them out there that don't. And those are the ones poaching left, right, and center. So it's really interesting times to see that, those competing managerial philosophies, to see that discussion play out right before your eyes in just, tangible examples everywhere you look, to see that poaching and people are like, people are happy here, I'm good. And then they lose their 3 senior people out of a staff of 7. And they're like, what do I do with my deadlines, right? That also creates a whole bunch of opportunity. Is that opportunity being created remotely or on site? I mean, yes, and, right? It's not either or, it's both. We've never been busier as a staffing organization than we are today. It's absolutely unreal and unprecedented. So it's very, very interesting to see, what I mean? Anybody who wants a job can have one. And if you have absolutely no experience whatsoever, I have some suggestions there too. But if you are in any way tenured, even at mid-level, and you're not satisfied with what you're doing, either you might want to be more flexible about a partially hybrid on-site schedule, or you might want to just go full bent remote and see if you can find something that's ideal and will stay remote indefinitely. We are extraordinarily careful about knowing which is which, right? Which job is remote for now and which job is truly going to stay remote. That distinction is critical. So we paid a lot of attention to making sure we, ask that question 8 different ways and are sure. So again, that's my take on COVID. That's really where the industry right now, that's the central tenant discussion that's being had. You know what I mean? Now, what does that do to hiring? Are people moving to a remote hire model, a remote sourcing model, or is local recruiting still the thing for both HR departments and agencies? And again, yes, and right, they're doing both, and they're doing both as we speak. So even AI and the job sites are playing a role in that, because for stuff that is truly remote, that becomes much more viable, and you have a much wider pond to fish in. So yeah, it's just interesting, man. It's really it's remarkable to sit in the chair I sit in and see this play out before my eyes, and be a very small part of that conversation. It's I to this day, like, it happened today. Like, people are like, well, they have to understand that they're like, they have to understand. I don't think they have to. Might be better if they did, but they're not going out of business if they don't. So, but the reverse is true, right? Like, they have to understand that people are going back to work, and they just can't expect to be remote the whole time. Yeah, well, maybe they can. I think that might be pretty viable depending on their skill set. So, it goes both ways. So anyway, that's my take on it. That's the hour. As far as what happens online and what happens behind the scenes, and where the industry's at today and what's most relevant, that's really my take on what's going down. There's other stuff we can talk about. I mean, I got some subject matter on, if you have no experience whatsoever, how do you break into the industry? We can talk about that. Obviously, we can talk about what jobs are hot, what skill sets are in most demand, who's hiring. These are also, I'm a wellspring of information if you want it, but that's the presentation. So that was my canned stuff, data.
Thank you very much, Josh. I'm going to speak for everybody and say whatever other info you want to add on about what things people are hiring for right now and how to break in the industry if you're new and whatever you, if you've got the time, I'll happily leave the meeting going for a while if you want to chat more and share some of that stuff.
All right, so just a little bit of extra detail.
Okay.
I speak at user groups once in a while, back when user groups in person were a thing in the before time. And I've often had people come up to me afterwards saying, hey, I'm really interested. I'm doing a, what are the crash course, I'm Udemying, and I'm in a code camp, and it's how do I get started? And the answer to that is have experience before you need it. And the way to get that is surprisingly easy. Most people think they have to apply for a job and get it, especially an internship, in order to get experience, and it's just not true. It's just not true. Create your own internship. My favorite thing to recommend people do, especially since most of these user groups used to take place at co-working facilities, is just literally wander the halls of a co-working facility. Hacker Lab, Urban Hive, the Cannery, the Granite Bay co-working facility, you name it, right? If they have IT people in that environment, especially if they're having IT meetings, and I dare say even more importantly, anything entrepreneurial, startup meetings, early company accelerators, angel investor type meetups, co-founder dating night, or whatever they call it, right? Anything where a startup's trying to get off the ground that has anything to do with IT, they all need coders, and none of them can afford you. So just walk in and say, hey, I'm willing to do code for, stock options, or work sweat equity, or whatever you want to call it. What you're doing is you're coding for a reference check. You make sure the people that you're working for, even though you're probably not being paid, have a legitimate LinkedIn profile. And just the same way as that HR rep's going to click on a LinkedIn profile and say, oh, that person looks legit. Oh, that person looks legit. Yep, probably yes file, right? 10,000 ants can't be wrong. These are recommendations you'll get on LinkedIn, and ideally people you can also use as a phone number providing reference check in return for the work you've done. And that work often takes a month or two because startups have a compact timeline. So that is my recommendation. That's how you break into the industry. You walk into your first job application with 2 legit technical references sitting on your application. It makes all the difference. So, you do it once, you're good. You do it twice, you're bona fide. Like, you have 2 reference checks that I can call and you're like, hey, code to this, code to that, code to this. Did a great job, no complaints. I'm going to listen to that. So, and again, always date the experience in your resume, but that goes for personal projects too. If you're doing unpaid internships or unpaid industry experience under your additional, you can put that in your resume. It doesn't even have to be under additional study and personal projects. Like it could be under your chronology, but be very clear it wasn't paid, right? You don't want to have to produce W-2s. But listing those dates and having those references, 2 legit reference checks, you're off to the races. So that's what I recommend as far as people breaking in. Don't rely on your code camp. It'll help. It might not do the trick. So, again, in 2008, 2009, during the recession, everything kind of changed. There just weren't any jobs. Like who was hiring when the economy was shrinking like a plummeting rock, right? So a lot of people pay good money to resume writing firms. And they don't necessarily mean to be wrong. They're just outdated. You know what I mean? Like the idea that a 1-page resume has to be 1 page because it's all you can ever do. That's outdated. Like it's all 1 scrolling page now. Don't write a novel, but 1.5, 2.5 pages, no problem. I also would say that everything changed again in 2020. COVID showed reluctant managers that remote is totally viable as a business model. So, don't feel like you are geographically limited. If you don't want to be on site because you have a young family or you don't, you hate driving or you just simply don't consider it necessary, and why take that extra risk of, whatever's going on in the pandemic? Like it's viable. You do not have to be on site anymore if you don't want to be. That said, there's more on-site jobs than not on-site jobs. So it's a smaller slice of the pie, but it's a viable pie. I would say that the fastest growing industries right now are, still the verticals of like healthcare and medical information systems. AI is always very interesting, big data, business intelligence. But I'm also seeing a lot of hiring in terms of large organizations modernizing. You have people that are quote unquote doing it right as opposed to just getting by. So I'm seeing product ownership and not just product management. I'm seeing people carry things through as a cause in an organization instead of just simply banging out whatever code they were asked to bang out. So that self advocacy and ownership is becoming more and more viable, where you aren't just good at this industry, you're good at this thing, and you're you don't mind driving that from the trenches. I'm still very partial to the jack of all trades is a master of none. I don't think specialization hurts you, but people are often Java developers are learning Go, and there's a whole lot of people willing to hire Java developers to learn Go or Scala, right? So there's an evolution of languages where people are willing to go to the next level as long as you're a consummate bona fide engineer. So don't feel like you're stuck just because you have 10, 15 years experience in one thing. You'd be surprised how many companies are willing to bring people in with an interest in doing more than that one thing, even though that's their background so far. I would also say that not all, but a majority of the front end JavaScript frameworks, if you're going in as a full stack developer where you're 60-40, 70-30, more so back end focused than front end focused, they're interchangeable. React is just as good as Angular, is just as good as Vue. They're not as hung up on which front end framework you're using, as long as you're using one of the modern JavaScript front end frameworks. The fact that you can write back-end APIs to play nice with those modern front-end frameworks, you understand interfaces and how to, set up a microservice. Like, sure, it's better if you have React and Angular if they're looking for a React guy, but it's not a deal breaker. So be clear on your experience. JavaScript framework, that's a viable phrase. Well, they have to know that React's a JavaScript framework, do they? Do they know? Like it might, it's one of those little things where you just sneak in that redundancy, and sometimes it helps you at the tail end. You never know. So yeah, those are my thoughts on where stuff's at. So again, I work with a company that helps people try to get where they're going in their career path and not just simply get them a job. Just about anybody can get somebody a job. I really try to focus on taking people more rapidly in whatever direction they're trying to go. I feel like that's something more tangible to talk about. In an industry where just about everybody's already gainfully employed, very few people are willing to hop for 5 or 10 grand a year. It's not worth the upheaval. But if their boss is making their life extremely difficult or just isn't technical enough for their taste, or they're the biggest fish in the pond and there's no one on this team they can really learn from anymore, and they'd rather work with a whole bunch of Yodas and be like excited that they can go to work and learn something every day, or they want to play with the shiniest new toys instead of outdated stuff, or they've always wanted to do language XYZ and they feel like they're at a point now where if they stick their neck out, somebody might just say yes. These are all infinitely more viable than they were 2 years ago, because you're not limited geographically anymore, and it's made all the difference. So as long as you can be sure that that company really does mean it about remote and they're not going to change their mind in 6 months, might be something to consider as far as the next stage in your career. So yeah, that said, man, bed and breakfast, Airbnb, one night a week out of town might be a thing. It's coming. So I hope it helps.
Thank you very much, Josh. I had one question for you about the part you were just referring to about the front end frameworks, how Angular and Vue are interchangeable, and Vue and React and so on.
Interchangeable-ish, depending on the role, but yes.
Yes. So that's kind of what what my question is about. So similar to the .NET versus .NET discussion we had earlier, what do you do in the cases of, like, let's say I had a resume, for example, that has, like, I'm going to make up numbers, 10 years of React on it, and hiring HR team is looking for a Vue developer. Right. Do we do like what Sean mentioned earlier and just trust that the technical managers there will instruct HR, hey, these 3 terms are all close enough, Vue, React, and Angular, just search for any of them, do the control F test on any of them, go for it?
I have a real world example for you. Right?
Please.
But has React been out for 10 years?
I was literally making up numbers just to give an example.
I need 15 years experience in MongoDB. I'm like, do you know?
Right. It's sad how often I see jobs with those kind of descriptions though too.
I hear you.
But
So I haven't seen a job yet that is diehard demanding Vue.js experience that won't consider an Angular or preferably a React person. So not one. I haven't seen one yet. So generally speaking, depending on what they're hiring for, they're going to be more knowledgeable in what they can hire to do so. I have seen positions where you really do need Angular, where you really do need React, or you really do need React Native and not just React.js, right? So there's stuff out there where the difference is very relevant. So I don't at all want to be misconstrued as saying they're all interchangeable and it never matters. More often than not, when you see full stack developer, you're probably looking at a mostly back-end developer that does some front end. That's been my experience, at least. 60-40, 70-30. In those cases, they're less hopped up about, you absolutely got to have this particular front end versus you got to be really good at the back end and understand how the modern JavaScript front end frameworks work and be able to, bounce between the two. So that was more where I was going with that. Hyper-focused front-end UI developers, generally speaking, if you really have to have Angular, you have to have Angular. You really have to have React, you have to have React. Same thing with cloud, right? A lot of people will just be cool with whatever cloud you got. Other jobs, no Azure, no love, right? So they're like, I have 10 years of AWS. Like, well, keep them. I want Azure, or the other way around. I need this specific, like, AWS EC2, tick, 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 like this, 9 syllables deep acronym where you've got to have that one thing. So it really depends. Depends on the client, the situation. But, I am of the impression that if you're really good at cloud, you're probably really good at cloud. Like, I don't tend to get that hung up on one or the other. If you've used a front-end framework, you're probably fine with a modern front-end framework. Can a .NET coder walk in and code Java? Probably not. You know what I mean? Like, maybe they could do it, but they're not going to get hired at the same level of proficiency and pay as they would if they were a bona fide consummate expert at it. So, and yet, every once in a while, you'll see people that are hiring Java developers like it's going out of style and asking them to learn Go. And half of them are thrilled to do so. They've always wanted to go because, functionals, like, this is the way, right? So it varies. I would say that I'm extremely curious to see what happens in the front end framework race. Angular's first on the scene. Angular's the one. Oh, wait a minute. React's pretty good. React's the one. Everybody's going to use React. Well, Vue, light end, web components, maybe it's not as intrusive as Angular or React on your application. Maybe Vue's the one, right? And then you have like CoffeeScript. They're like, no, it's not working for you. So, it's interesting. It's just I really appreciate watching that evolution of the industry itself driving the technology and the technology catching up with itself. It's neat. So, is Vue reacting to come out on top? Tune in 5 years from now for the for the verdict.
Cool. Thank you. That was very helpful. Other folks, if you have questions, feel free to just unmute yourself and ask away. We've got a pretty small headcount in here tonight. I don't think there'll be too much talking over the top of each other.
I still want a copy of the recording on vinyl.
Totally. Colored pressings too. One on red, one on white.
There you go. Right, exactly. That way I'm cool.
No questions from anybody? All right, Josh, I think Alfredo has a couple questions. Oh, okay, Alfredo, feel free to unmute yourself and ask away. Alfredo, I can see that you unmuted yourself, but I cannot hear you. Something happened.
So sorry about that.
There you are.
All right. First off, great presentation. Thank you so much for the tips. I was just wondering if you could speak towards maybe consulting and also having a long period of unemployment before jumping back into the workplace again.
Two great questions. So let's address the consulting first, because I think the long period of unemployment is even more important. But that's something that might be a little bit more detailed. So freelance versus consulting, right? When you write down a company on your resume, that's the company that paid you. Your employer is the one that paid you, right? For background checks, it can be accidental that you write down, Macy's, even though you were working for XYZ Consulting at the time. On your LinkedIn, I put Macy's, right? Like, hey, this is who I was, this is where I was at, and this is what I was doing. I want to be known for that. On my resume for a background check, I would absolutely put XYZ Consulting and then do an indent and Macy's and these dates and just roll like you would. But that way it's unmistakable that this consulting company covers these master dates, and you indented the resume so it's obvious, and then you went by project to make sure you knew which clients were actually clients and what was done at those individual clients. A lot of people will make the grave error of saying consulting for the last 9 years, and they'll list one brick of skills. Really, you use those exact skills for 9 years straight. No variation project to project. Interesting. Unlikely, right? You have 9 years of experience in something that came out 2 years ago. Unlikely, right? So be very wary of being too broad in your data capture. Another thing is freelance. When you're working for you and your company is you, there's a very big danger that self-employed is unemployed. I did freelance for 10 years, like every day, you didn't take any time. And there are cases where they did it every day. Sure. Yeah. But there's a lot of cases where they did not. And there were giant 7, 8, 9 month gaps where they had no client and no income. And they're just trying to say I worked the whole time, and they didn't, right? And background checks pick up on that. So be very cautious of the freelance with massive swaths of time. The way to fix that, list some clients. Ideally list some clients with dates, but for the love of Jehovah, at least list some clients. Something. Give them a reason to believe you. Self-employed is unemployed. Be careful with that. It's not really the case, but you can run into that stigma if you don't dispel it, or at least make some manual effort to dispel it. So listing your clients under, I worked for Hitachi and Macintosh and Toshiba, and you list all these clients. And even if you don't list dates, at least you got something in there to make them believe you. My preference, list the dates, list the project, list the skills, just like you would a normal resume. And that way they know each one's an independent client, independent project, and they can see that work history. But in absence of that, at least give them something. How to contend with a large gap in your resume. My preferred phraseology, first of all, cover the dates. Your resume should be one long contiguous thing, right? Cover the dates. Don't just leave a 2.5-year gap and don't address it. They're gonna notice, right? Again, highly extrapolative environment, right? If you're in a resume or you're in an interview setting, they're going to interpret left, right, and sideways. You don't know what they're going to actually interpret there. So, was that a 2.5-year gap because you were on the lam? Were you incarcerated? Were you, what was that? If you were working in a different industry, say so. Hey, took a break from computers to pursue my art career, whatever it is, right? Just account for the time. Huge recommendation there is while you do that, tell them what's up, be honest. List what you did to stay technical during that time. Give them a reason to pick you, right? Why should they believe you? Here's why, right? What did you do to stay technical during that time? I went to user groups like SAC Interactive, and I, studied these particular things, and I did a code camp, and I did a Hello World project. I did all these things to keep myself sharp technically while I was not working in my field. And now I'm ready to go, put me in coach, I'm ready to play, right? So, just it makes common sense, but a lot of people, common sense isn't that common. A lot of people will just leave it off because they didn't know what to say. So the phrase I like, the header, if you will, like, what do I put in place of the company name? Professional sabbatical. Professional sabbatical is intentional. I am aware I was not working in my field during that time, meant to do that. And you can have a professional sabbatical, hey, took time out to deal with family, took time out to deal with illness, fully addressed now, ready to go. And it doesn't have to be the most recent thing in your resume. You can use that to address a gap that was, 10 years deep. Took time out for family. What does that mean? Did you care for a sick relative? Did you have 2 kids? Who knows? Who cares, right? At least the time is addressed. Took time out for family. You don't have to get any more personal than you want to get. But at least you're addressing it in the resume so that the history is continuous. My strongest recommendation is if you're going to do that and you want to stay in the technical field, explain what you did to stay technical or become more technical during that time. Again, it's not paid experience. You kind of have carte blanche. You can say whatever you want. Hope that helps.
I'm going to use that. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
One more question, actually, if you don't mind. Do you recommend any professional resume, what would you call them, like writers, people that would, format the resume and kind of handle that?
It's a tough one, man. I mean, kind of, but kind of not. I find most professional writers get them wrong. I find most professional resume writers are using outdated information to do it in an outdated way. And it's better than garbage. It's better than doing it yourself if you truly have no talent for the art whatsoever. I'm not saying it's worth less, but if you can use a resume format that addresses the main tenets of what I was presenting earlier, it doesn't have to be my format. My format's actually rather basic. If you can address those underlying points, though, if your document survives all 4 of those stages nicely, if it hits those elements of what's going on behind the scenes and why would the resume be in that format in the first place? If it addresses those, you're golden. So if a professional resume writer is going to provide a service and charge you for it, the fact that they can make a nice, pretty 1-page PDF, I mean, if you're going after a UI job, maybe it matters. You know what I mean? Like maybe some of the UI visually focused positions really, really care what your 1-page resume looks like and it has this great consistent look and feel. Sure, I'm sure there's cases where it's relevant, but if you're after a back-end development position and they give you this flowery 1-page resume, I would use that as the basis for my final resume, but I'd adjust it myself afterwards. I'd add more detail. I'd add a skills used column for every single job description entry so that there's a chronological, you have to associate this skill set with these dates. That's most important. If you just have them on top at the top, because they should know that this goes with that. And if you say you developed, well, it says Java up here, they have to assume you developed in Java. Why? Why do they assume? Why do they have to do anything other than process the pile of resumes they have 50 at a time, right? Why do they have to do anything? So I don't advise against using a resume writing service, but just be aware that it might not be gospel and that you might need to modify it even if you get it professionally done.
Understood. Thanks so much. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Anyone else
Right
have
on, you guys.
questions? Going once, going twice.
This is Alfredo again. I'm going to have more later. I'm sure I'm going to think about this, process it, really marinate it. And I'm probably going to have questions later. Is there an email or something?
Yeah, of course.
Josh or Nolan that I can email you guys? If something pops up or I need clarification somewhere.
Nolan knows me. Nolan knows me really well. He's got my number, all my details. This is my email address. This is the company. We post jobs every once in a while. I wouldn't rely on the jobs posted there as a end all be all of everything we have available, but a good half to 2/3 of them are up there. So a lot of the remote positions we have are up there. That's for sure. So if you're looking for something remote, techsystems.com is not a bad place to find it because we got a lot of them. But in terms of working with me directly, I mean, like I said, I'm not. My interaction with people, especially local folks, is not wholly predicated on you being actively looking for a job. I tend to lock arms with people just in general over the years, keep them informed on what the market's doing. And if the stars ever line up where it makes sense for me to help find them something that's going to take them in the direction they want to go with their career, then that's, we can do that. So I'm always very appreciative of people sending other people my way that are not absolutely thrilled with their job, because 9 times out of 10 I can really help with that. But also people that they're not unhappy with their job, but they've gone from that junior mid to like verging on senior, and they're just not being given a shot in their current position because there's too many other senior people that feel like they have priority because they've been there longer. Oh, I can help that a lot. You got somebody who's ready to take their crack at professional at bat. We do that. So anyone wants to send people my way, that's always well received and appreciated.
Josh is not just giving lip service to in this spot. I've been running this tech meetup for a long time. He's spoken for us several times. Several of the attendees at the groups have gotten jobs through Josh over the years and been very happy with the results of that. It's like I often say this when the reason I have him here as a speaker is Josh is the only tech recruiter I've dealt with that actually seems like he cares about what you want to do. It's not, like you said earlier, just finding 40 hours a week for somebody. He'll actually help find the next phase in your career to keep you happy doing what you want to do next and find better quality fits for everyone. So if you're looking for a gig or somebody who is, I highly recommend grabbing Josh's email address out of the chat window there and hitting him up later.
Thanks, man.
Yep. He's not paying me to say this either, I promise. Does anybody else have questions for him before we wrap it up? All right, then everyone just make sure you grab the contact info for Josh out of the chat window. Josh, again, thank you very much for speaking to the group again. Great to see you as always, my friend.
Likewise, man.
And hopefully we'll be back to doing these in person soon sometime. And I'm sure we'll chat soon about what's going on in Sacramento and all that stuff too.
Sounds good.
Really good
All
information for people looking for jobs. Great information about resumes. Thanks.